Hello and thanks for tuning in. I'm Holly Shields, welcoming you all to another edition of Kalkine TV's Executive Corner Expert Talks. Today we're narrowing in on Urban Hawk, a company with a focus on spatial situational awareness and real-time applications for end-user requirements, both short and long-term. And the best way to do that is to sit down with James Murphy, the founding director. Welcome to the show, James. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Really good to be on.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Now, first and foremost, could you maybe share with us how Urban Hawk helps companies boost efficiency and excel above their competitors?
Two words, I think, is situational awareness. And we are only, I think, anyway, in the company at least, reaching the beginnings of what can be done with this. It's an incredibly exciting area to even look at. If you go beyond the specifics of the tech, I suppose mapping is one way of looking at it, but mapping in such a bespoke, specialized and accessible fashion that I suppose any sector really can benefit, because they can look at an area around them, perhaps an area that they're looking to market to. They can look at data, as in customer feedback in real time, matched to a physical environment, and they can use the tools of virtual and augmented reality to implement a business vision which perhaps previously was doable but slower. So the main thing I suppose that we're looking at here is speed in terms of delivery of a vision, which is possible, we make it probable, accuracy in terms of what they can see and how they can see it, and then above all, accessibility, either for the higher ups who want to make big decisions about where a company goes, or for their rank and file staff, who are just as important in terms of how they do it, but above all for ultimately the customer, the person who is using, be it a transportation, insurance, any other application. And the applications are limitless. So in a nutshell, that's it at the moment.
Right. I mean, it sounds like you also employ some advanced technologies there. Do you use AR, I believe it was, in your...
We do use AR and we use VR. We've always been, it's a good problem to have, which is a phrase that I overuse. We've always been slightly ahead in terms of what people are using 5 minutes into the future. And I suppose if you're an R&D company or a technology company, that's what you should be. The drawback to that, of course, is that certain sectors may have an inkling of those terms. They may have begun to get them. But if you're trying to market it ahead of time, sometimes that can be tricky. So people are starting to know what. I mean, for example, we did a lot of work on something called geospatial technology, and that was one of our main focuses. And we still use and harness the developments that we, the inroads that we made in that. But when we tried to actually make that the focus or the thing 5 years ago, we were it was too early. So AR, VR, AI, obviously, Internet of Things. I would say any of the buzzwords that you hear in tech, be it as a layperson or actually within the trade, if it's there, we use them. So, for example, something like robotics, even, which once again we have used in research and development. It is not necessarily a selling point; it's not something that we focus on. But in order to make extreme close-ups in mapping and accessibility possible, you probably need a robot to make that happen, without giving everything away about how you do it, without giving you a 3-hour lecture on how it works. So yeah, mostly VR and AR, also some AI, but generally speaking, if it's there, be it physical, be it hardware or software, we probably have used it at some stage, or we're having to use it, and if we haven't used it, we're probably about to. So
it's interesting because it does seem like, as you mentioned, I think you are one step ahead of the game in terms of tech, but then the transport sector in many countries does tend to be behind a little bit behind the times. That's certainly what we see here in Australia some of the time, especially in the public sector. But
I refuse to believe that. So it was a Keating Hawk fan growing up. They were good guys. They had a vision. We won't get political yet.
I suppose, how do you see automation sort of taking hold here in this sector?
It has already taken hold, frankly. Once again, people aren't necessarily aware of how it's taking hold. I think we could be looking at a stage whereby And this is only the beginnings of it. At the moment, for example, let's say you use an application, be it City Mapper, whichever, and we have our own potential counterpart equivalent to that in the beginnings of development. It can be of enormous help to have some automated response to tell you where you're going, roughly what it looks like, etc. But that, once again, it's only scratching the surface of where it could be, or indeed should. So it is perfectly possible to use a reliable application of management that appears to offer you a whole bespoke vision, but it's not up to the minute. As in, I had an experience recently whereby a train line had been entirely cancelled, and there was about a 5-minute window at least in terms of knowing that. Now, the automation eventually told me that, but I knew from the human element before I knew from the automation. So there's some catch up to be played, not in terms of what's doable, because the automation already can do that, but in terms of an accessible series of applications that can make that a reality in the palm of your hand with 3D mapping to make it look good. Because the thing is, it's not enough to have the automation, and it's not enough to have the mapping. It has to be something that people can use, be they disabled, elderly, in distress, particularly post-pandemic, where people are, anxious about crowds or that sort of thing. So all of the tech is actually there, the right parcel of the tech. And you mentioned the politics. Well, we are not a politically partisan company. Technology, by its very nature, at least aims to have, I suppose, a post-adversarial attitude towards these things. But on the other hand, you do have to tread a tightrope, and you have to talk to local officials. We are very fortunate in Britain, particularly in Bristol, where the company operates out of most of the time, to have great relationships with people who have a vision for how technology in the transportation system can advance these things, with automation at the center of it. But you have to be diplomatic, you have to be kind of political in how you lobby people to get things done, and you have to trust in the technology's ability to do things, but ultimately have a sense of marketing about what it's not doing, and that's where we come in.
Right. I think it's interesting that you do mention that, yes, the technology is there, I think, but it's the parcel, as you said, that needs some, I think, configuration perhaps. So that's definitely something that I suppose we will see in the coming years, I think, that better applied. But yes, that is very, very interesting as well. And another piece of technology, I think, that fits into this is 5G infrastructure, particularly in the areas of mobility and energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're seeing that in the 5G Victory program ourselves out in Europe. And the Germans particularly are evangelical about this in how they make it happen. There are a number of companies who are involved in that, notably Orange, and of course ourselves. Starts with mapping again. So mapping any kind of rail infrastructure unit. Sadly, the pandemic delayed the physical ability to look at that to some extent. But what it didn't delay was the technological wireless ability to communicate about how it was going on, which is another further proof of the progress being made. At the moment, there is unfortunately the Russia-Ukraine situation, which once again is a delay because many of the German infrastructure systems, including rail, have had to be very generously given over to help the refugee situation. Now, that is kind of the answer to your question, insofar as ultimately it comes back to the human element, because the technology is there in terms of mapping the infrastructure, in terms of being able to give three-dimensional readouts of it, in terms of interfacing a political vision of what transportation should do with a corporate delivery of that for a customer service where they can literally on their phone get everything from can I have a coffee on my way through to are there delays. What it can't do is actually prevent human errors in the bigger picture on the geopolitical global stage. It can't prevent something like the pandemic or Russia invading Ukraine or whatever it is. But what it can do is help the management of the fallout from some of those things. be it in your everyday experiences as a customer, or in terms of, I suppose, how local governments and central governments deal with it. But it is both a physical and a virtual tool. You have to visit the physical place ultimately. And you can only do so much of that virtually, but it is quite remarkable how much of it has been achieved virtually in these past 2 to 3 years. So.
I don't doubt that. And I think I can imagine it's only going to grow and expand in the near term as well. And it is remarkable technologies you just mentioned. And just to circle back to Urban Hawk, I understand that you're working to revolutionize multimodal transport in the UK using things like AR, trip planning, and guidance as well that's tailored through geospatial data, which sounds very promising. How's this all progressing, if you could give us a snapshot of it?
Well, how long have you got? Now, you mentioned AR earlier on. That's the way in. I was speaking about this the other day where I said, should we mention AR as being a selling point, just in case people who we're ultimately marketing to don't know what that is? And I think they are going to know what it is. It's AR that makes it multimodal, really. I suppose, once again, I'm going to name drop Citymap, will be the closest current example of that. But the more you look at Citymap, the more you realize they're actually incredibly cautious about their own growth, to the extent that they are, I think, perhaps even stalling it somewhat, which would leave a gap in terms of where it's going. And there are countless competitors and alternatives who will rise up and are rising up already. I think our USP will be that it's a very personalized, bespoke user experience. There'll be one for mapping the data collection, but we're going to merge that with 3D situational awareness. 3D situational awareness application is a thing in itself, which we're calling the Polaran World Engine. That's already hashtagging and getting interest online. And it has cross applications to other sectors beyond transportation. But what will happen is that those two things fuse together through an AR multimodal 3D driven platform will ensure that the average user on any transport journey will have countless options in terms of how they plan it, manage it, and adjust to unforeseen obstacles and difficulties that can arise. And that in turn links to things like insurance and just consumer awareness generally. So in a nutshell, that's it. But yeah, it's very much, it's the most exciting thing I think that we're working on. Not that it isn't all exciting, but that's the thing that we really, wow.
It sounds like it's something that will completely revolutionize trip planning, I think.
Yeah, and that's the idea. And you know, it's a cliche to talk revolution and evolution, but we've seen I mentioned, you know, all the tech has been there for a long time. What we have done is introduced, because I talked about the human element earlier on, we went back to that customer experience. We kind of thought, well, you know, because no one actually knows where technology is going to go. I mean, we do know, because we're technologists, but what I mean is, if I'd said to you sort of even 20 years ago what a phone would be able to do now, you wouldn't have believed it. It would have been sci-fi stuff, to the extent that science fiction is now almost redundant, because it's very difficult to make a Star Trek or a Star Wars, or well, not Star Wars, not sci-fi, but you know, anything like that to watch, because kind of, I've got that in my pocket. This isn't, you know, impressing me. But the human element of those stories is why people still make them. Whether they make them any good is a different matter. Exactly the same principle here. We went to each and every provider, be it transportation, insurance, consumer, etc., and we listened to what the customer was missing, and we fused that kind of pastoral care dimension to the commercial awareness, and then we brought in the technology. Obviously, technologies that we have improved in-house through reverse engineering and so on. So there is obviously some just pure science involved, and yes, our own technological innovations, but it was ultimately about that je ne sais quoi, that kind of human vision for what the market was missing and how we can match that to a better consumer experience. And that is ultimately what makes anybody, from Google, the new Twitter thing with Elon Musk, you know, it's about that user interface and how it helps people, and are they going to buy it? Basically, that's ultimately what everybody's after. Completely
agree. It does sound very much beneficial, considering everything that you've you've disclosed about it. But it's definitely something we look forward to seeing, and look forward to seeing how it shapes out and how it maps out. But with that said, thanks very much for joining us on the show here and sharing all your insights with us on executive.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm sure my answer is probably a little bit too long because it's me, but we can always revisit it.
Quite all right. But thanks very much. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
My pleasure.
Thanks for your time as well, viewers. That was James Murphy, Founding Director of Urban Hawk. And if you missed any part of that chat, you can catch the full interview on our YouTube channel at Kalkine Media. And make sure to subscribe as well. I'm Molly Shields, reminding you to stay apprised and invest wise with Kalkine.